The program today, as you know, is on rethinking transportation, and the format goes like this. I will start out, sort of lay the groundwork and give you some facts that you can use to, make some decisions and hopefully make some changes. And I'll be followed by Lief, who is Horwitz, right there, who is chair of our city's Multi-Modal Transportation Committee. And then hopefully we'll have about a half an hour to have a real conversation about transportation, some Q&A, but also a community conversation, because we're hoping this is the start of something. And then at the very end, and I hope you stick around for this, we're going to have a paper read by a local high school student who won a contest sponsored by CCL on the subject of climate change. And, it's great to have our young people involved in this problem that's going to affect them more than anybody else. So that's our format. And let me start out by telling you that we're here because we've got a sense that just maybe this addiction to the automobile isn't working out quite as well as we would hope. And really, we have to be aware of the fact that so much of what we do when we transport ourselves is simply a product of habit. It's what other people do. It's what's evolved over the last 100 years as we began to worship our automobiles. So let's do a little erasing in our head and really take a critical look at how this is working for us. So let's ask ourselves, how well is this absolute car addiction? And I'm not pointing to anybody in this room. I'm talking about our whole society. So don't anybody take it personally, because we have people in this crowd who are really leading the movement to do some interesting things in terms of transportation, some better things. And so let's look at the first thing that is near and dear to all of our hearts. How well is this working for us personally, in terms of our emotions, in terms of our feelings about society, in terms of our health? And so, asking yourself these questions. Yes, a car can get me from point A to point B, but how does it work to improve my physical health and life expectancy? How about my mental health? Do I feel great every time I get out of traffic and get out of my car? How about my cognitive abilities? How about my interactions with others? And if we think about it, there's some things that actually accomplish these things for us, improve these things, and we'll talk about those. In terms of our automobiles, they're part and parcel of a massive health crisis that's going on in this country that we're all aware of, that we read about daily. We're all getting heavier, and we're less active than we've ever been before, historically. So it's actually, in the last couple of years, started to affect life expectancy. For the first time, when you looked at that chart, it kept nudging up a little bit each and every year. It's actually dropping down by a very small amount, but that's pretty telling. That's a warning sign. And our inactivity and our dependence on motorized transportation, in many ways, is responsible for approximately 186,000 avoidable deaths per year. And that's not from car accidents, that's just from health problems. So look at what we're doing in comparison to the norm, in comparison to other industrialized, intelligent countries. It's suggested that we take 10,000 steps a day. Americans take half that many. And we're aware of that because there's so many people who are buying those gizmos so they can, count the number of steps they're taking. They know that's important. But the real casualties to all this going forward are our children. I don't know if you saw the study that came out last year that said that teenagers are no more active than 65-year-olds. And that is truly sad, extremely sad. And we see that mirrored in the way our children are transported to schools, a 50% decrease in biking and riding. 45% of our children in this country are driven to and from school every day. Compare that to 12% in 1969. And therefore, it follows this third figure. 1/3 of our schools are now air pollution danger zones. And you know why that is, because you've tried to, go nearby some of our schools when they're letting out. And there are cars there lined up. It can take you 20 minutes to get by a school. And all of those emissions are being held into that area. Plus what it's doing, and I've talked to bus drivers about this, they're held into that traffic, so their exhaust is pouring out right at that area of our schools. There's something really wrong about a kid walking out of school at the end of the day and having to breathe in this really toxic air. And it's no wonder that we're seeing really an epidemic in asthma in our country. But it's not just our health that we're worried about. It's not just our health that's being sacrificed. It's the health of the planet and the future of our species. Transportation is now the #1 contributor to climate change. It was energy generation. There's a bit of good news there in the fact that, we're burning less coal. But for those of you who were at our forum about natural gas, the replacement really isn't nearly as clean as they're talking about. But right now, it is our cars and our trucks that are really the main cause of our emissions in this country. In our state, 40% of our emissions are attributable to transportation. And when our city's new climate advisory committee, that we should all be very thrilled that the city appointed, finishes their study, hopefully later this year, we're going to find that our cars are probably #1 or #2 in terms of the amount of our emissions. And speaking of emissions, in terms of per capita emissions, our per capita emissions are higher than the rest of the county. They're much higher than Seattle. They're higher than the rest of the county because we have bigger houses. We tend to be more affluent. And we know that affluency means more emissions, unfortunately. It doesn't have to be that way, it shouldn't be that way, but that's the way it is. And we compare ourselves to Seattle, they have clean energy. We don't. So here's one of the ways, some things we can't control, but here's one of the things that we can control in terms of emissions. And feeling, not totally embarrassed and humiliated about what's going on in our own community, and that is to do something about transportation, make it saner. Our cars and trucks are also the biggest contributor to air pollution. 30% of all car trips are less than a mile. 82% of the trips we take as Americans are done by automobile, and you compare that to Europe, where that figure is between 50 and 65%. We've got a lot to learn from Europe about what they've done that we haven't done that really has done so much to lower their emissions and to lower the number of miles that they drive. And we're headed, unfortunately, in very much the wrong direction. Between 1990 and 1995, car trips on our miles traveled on our roads and highways increased by 40%. And then we all rely, hopefully, on technology to correct this problem for us. Unfortunately, technology is once again sending us, or in this case, sending us in the wrong direction. There was a off-site study done by UC Davis last November that showed that Uber and similar services are responsible for a 6% reduction in bus use in 6 major cities. Seattle was in that study. And this next figure is very important. Between 46 and 51% of the trips taken by Uber and similar services would not have been taken at all if it weren't for those services. So we heard a lot of things when Uber first came out and other services like Uber that somehow they were going to reduce traffic. And the promise was they would do nothing but drive people to bus stations and transit stations. Well, that's not happening. They are increasing our traffic problems. And then our next big technology discovery invention that people are excited about is self-driving cars. And yes, there's some good things about self-driving cars. They will reduce accidents, at least if all the cars on the road or most of them are self-driving cars. They will reduce our need for parking. But think about this. With a self-driving car, it's going to pick me up at my home and drop me off at TNC, and then it's going to go back to my home or some other place. So one trip becomes 2. And so my simple trip to the grocery store back and forth is now 4 car trips, cars on our roads. It will promote sprawl. There's already been a lot of conversation about that. Why do I have to live near services, near city centers, when I can just call up and be chauffeured door to door for all my services and all my needs? And potentially kill public transportation in a lot of areas. And that's of real concern. We've already seen the effect by Uber, but think about this. The people who use Uber right now and who will initially use self-driving cars are people who can afford it. The people who really need public transportation are left with a system that's underused and eventually underfunded. So those are going to be the first and sad victims of our use of these kinds of services. I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Wall-E. Everybody should. It's a cartoon feature or animated feature, but bells should go off in terms of waste and in terms of how we might end up as human beings. In this movie, they don't have to move anymore. They're just, powered around. Their feet, as you'll notice, have become very small, their legs very short, and the main reason for their toes is because they're bored to death. They wiggle and watch them, and that's entertainment, I guess. But this is an extreme example, but we get warnings about things throughout the history of humanity, and if we fail to react to them, we end up in problems. So why don't we walk and bike more? Number one reason in this country is lack of infrastructure. It's as simple as that. If you don't make it convenient and safe for people to walk and bike, they won't. Now, on this island, we have about 5% of very committed people. They will, ride to work down the middle of the road. They're not scared. They'll do it no matter what. And we have people walk. We have Leslie Marshall here whose feet are her car, really. She walks every place. That's her main mode of transportation. But even she says, a lot of times it's just plain scary, even in downtown Winslow. So if we're going to do anything about this, we've got to make the infrastructure that's required. And we've also got a culture of the automobile. We love our automobiles. A rite of passage in our country for a young person is when they get their driver's license. Oh, you're now an adult. You can do something extremely important. And in a great series of articles, and he's written several books, this gentleman named Tom Vanderbilt wrote The Crisis in American Walking, and he talks about all of the things that we're going to be talking about today. But one thing that he said that I think needs to stick in our head is we have engineered walking out of existence in this country. And then he goes on to say, as every single transportation expert will tell you, that the 2 biggest impediments to walking and biking is distance and safety. Less than 2% of our federal funds go for walking and biking, but that's misleading because that money goes to the state. And many states are finding ways to actually use those for roads. So it's an even lower figure. In 1970s, there was a fork in the road, and Europe took one road and we took the other. They started getting really serious about walking and biking. The United States, it was all about roads. And for those of you who've been to Europe, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You come back and you say, I walk 5-6 miles every day, didn't think a thing of it. It's because the culture promotes it, everybody's doing it. And they have made it possible for you to do that. We have sort of a funny view of things, and that's one of the reasons that really thinking about this issue is important. And I don't think anybody's to blame. Attitudes and opinions evolve over time. We follow the norm, and these things have become the norm. Walking and biking for most people is not transportation, it's exercise. And a walker is someone without a car. We go down the street and we see someone carry some grocery bags, and our inclination is to pull over and say, hey, do you need a ride? Because, people do pleasure walking, but actually walking to do stuff is not something we're totally comfortable with. Think about these things, because these are extremely common. We think nothing of calling up a bunch of friends and saying, hey, I'll meet you at the top of the island and let's go for a walk. So you got 5 or 6 cars driving to the top of the island to take a 2-mile walk. Or we drive to the gym to use the treadmill. And we go, I'm going to do 5 miles today. Wow. And we keep going, and then we get back in our car and drive home. You know, we could avoid the middleman. We could simply walk to the gym, not go inside, and walk home and do the same thing. But later, we think nothing of the fact we find out we need bread or eggs or whatever for dinner, of jumping in our car for a half mile or 3/4 of a mile. You know, skip all the rest of the stuff. Just start walking to the store. We've got a beautiful town. We've got a beautiful island. You can walk anywhere, and it's pleasurable. So what's the solution to all this? Well, we start viewing walking and biking as both transportation and exercise. That it is a mode. My legs and my feet were put there for a reason. And 100, 150 years ago, people didn't have to go out and exercise. What? I just came back from town. It was 10 miles. I don't think I need any more exercise. But, you know, it's really been skewed, our thinking in this country. So, you know, if we can start seeing this is a way to get to the services that I need, my feet. Let me think about that way first. Number 2, we invest and build the infrastructure to make it safe and make it efficient. Make it safe and make it efficient. You know, I'm going to mention the bridge project, which has just been completely turned down. That may be a little political, but I really don't care, because I think not to mention it wouldn't make any sense within the context of this conversation. Most people didn't understand the need for the bridge. It's complicated. This whole thing is complicated. But all of a sudden, hey, they're just going to plaster a bridge across 350, whatever, not realizing that that was a significant connection for walkers and particularly young bikers. Think about this. What if we had 2 roads and then there was a stream or a big culvert or whatever? Would we not build a bridge across it? Of course we'd build a bridge across it. It's for cars. Yeah, that's, you know, it's that thinking that we've got to change. That if we want to promote non-car travel, we got to make it possible. And I am truly saddened by the end of that bridge. I don't think enough people understood the absolute necessity to connect a whole series of pathways, bikeways throughout our city. And Leif's going to talk about this more, but this is exactly what we're talking about. What most people in our community don't know is that we have an engineering department and this really hardworking, lovely multi-modal transportation committee that has literally been working for years to create the kind of community that we really say we want, that has pathways, that makes it safe to cross streets, that makes it accessible for everybody. And the more we in this room become familiar with that and educate others, there is a plan. People have been working like mad. This is, you know, the confusing thing is when we're faced with just one small part of it. And we go, what is that about? No, it's part of a whole system. You know, if we did our roads that way and said, what's that 1 mile about? No, it's connecting everything to the services and things that they want. Number 3, we must think and plan for all ages and abilities. You know, we're hardwired to think of ourselves first. It's just automatically. We wouldn't have survived if we didn't think of ourselves first. But it causes a problem when we really need to expand our thinking to the entire community. And I'm going to lie here, I may be willing to whiz down the road on my bicycle and be perfectly content. But kids can't do that. People with mobility problems can't walk along some of these roads. People on wheelchairs, things aren't accessible for them to be mobile. We need to think about everybody. And, you know, during this conversation of the bridge, it was sort of indicative of that. I won't use the bridge. Well, you know, maybe I won't either. I live in the other end of the island. I don't care. I want everybody to be mobile. It's in my best interest. And, you know, my first 10 years of employment, I worked with adults who had physical and mental limitations. And let me tell you, the difference in their lives once our society became somewhat accessible to them. It's the difference between being sheltered forever in their home and being out and about and having a real life like the rest of us take for granted. So, you know, we have constantly got to think about all these people. You know, they're not a big portion of our society, but imagine if we had said in terms of buildings, no, you can't come into the courthouse because we're not going to put up a ramp. You can't pay your taxes because we're not. The same thing applies to mobility. We have to think about mobility for our children, for those who have impairments or challenges, for everyone. Number 4, my favorite, take the bus. And it's my favorite because of where I live. I live at the top of Baker Hill, and I have become a bus person. And it is so sane and so logical. We don't have a perfect bus system, but we've got a darn good bus system if people learn to use it creatively. What I have found is I oftentimes go into Seattle early in the morning. I need to come back at 2 o'clock. The regular commuter buses aren't running. I jump on BI Rides, and it lets me off in Linwood. And my car is there because that's where I put it there in the morning. And yes, I did drive a little bit, and it is electric, but still it's a car on the road, but a very short distance. And I'm not driving all the way into town and parking and so on and so forth. And how many of you know about bus number 90? Fantastic. Bus number 90 is a hidden, wonderful secret, if you ask me, on this island. It travels up and down 305 pretty much all day long. So, you know, this is another reason for something like the STO, or really running something up the spine of our island, because people can come onto that and jump on bus 90, and they can get to work in Winslow, they can get on the ferry, they can visit friends, they can do their shopping, and jump on it and get back. Bus 90, become a fan of bus 90, ride bus 90. And you know, even if you think you're not going to use these services, ride them. It's fun to do, and then you can tell other people how they work. But most of all, we need to change our thinking and be active parts of changing this culture from an auto-centered culture to one that also accommodates the needs and really increases the amount of walking and busing that's going on in our community. Yeah, we need our cars. I have a car. I'll probably always have a car. But the trick is we need it much less than we think. So if you're going to go do an errand or you're going to do something, ask yourself, could I take the bus? Could I walk? Could I bike? Those should pop into your head just as quickly as jumping into your automobile. And this idea of combining errands and combining trips. When I lived in Maine, I ran groups, and it was sort of like Weight Watchers. They made a commitment to reduce their use of resources across the board. Most of them achieved in 1 year between 30 and 50% use of their automobiles. You know how they did it? They simply planned their week out. It was as simple as that. You know, they said, Wednesday I got a dentist appointment, that'll be my shopping day. It is amazing. It is amazing how quickly you can reduce your automobile use by just some simple planning. And it's a time saver. And this is what I think people don't understand. When they hear about taking the bus and riding and walking and whatever, it takes too long. I'll tell you what takes too long is getting in your car and running here, going home, and then running there, and bump, a bump, a bump. And it's aggravating. So plan out your transportation needs for the week and, you know, see what makes the most sense. I believe in proselytizing because people are laughing about me who know me. Yeah, hey. And I'll tell you why, because I absolutely know that the meek will not inherit the earth, and they sure aren't going to save it. If we're quiet about these things, as we see our environment being eroded, being destroyed, when we see the future of our children severely, severely compromised, and we just don't say anything about it. We don't proselytize. We don't, sign up some more true believers. We're not doing what we could do. And we have to do everything that we can do. So invite people to do these things with you. Next time people want to go on a walk with you, say, fine, I'll tell you what, I'm going to take the bus into town. Let's walk around town. We'll do some shopping while we're there. Let's really examine all the pathways. Let's have some fun in town, and we'll get lots of exercise. Very importantly, educate our decision makers. Educate our decision makers constantly about the need and benefit in investing in walkers and bikers and not just cars. Because I'll tell you who's contacting them all the time, who's screaming in letters to the editor, my road has a pothole. Oh my God. We are used in this country, we won't settle for anything except absolutely perfection in our roads. But those of us who want to walk and bike and do other things, we have needs, and we need to share those with our decision makers. We need to go to council. We need to write them letters and tell them. They're not expected to be experts on all of the things that they make decisions on. But listening to you guys, listening to the experts has never been more important. What's the payback? The payback is we reduce our contribution to climate change. We can feel proud of our island. We can serve as a model for others. We can increase the overall health of our community. We can reduce traffic. The single only way we can reduce traffic, the only way, is to get people to drive less. It's as simple as that. That's the only way we can do it. And so by biking and walking and enjoying those kinds of things and taking the bus, that's the way we do it. And this last figure is sort of unbelievable for people. We were participating in the Earth Day event last Saturday, and we asked people before looking at the answer, many of them, if all of us on the island just reduced our car trips by one car round trip a day, what would it mean to the number of cars on the road? And I saw people said 100. Some people said 1,000. Oh, that's too high, isn't it? No, over 19,000. I mean, that's huge. That's very doable. And that's something that initially we all should shoot for. So let's get going on this. Let's work together as a community. Let's get healthier. Let's have fun doing it. And let's do it now. And a lot of people talk about that electric cars are going to save everything. Well, experts are telling electric cars aren't really going to be the norm until past 2030. We've got 12 years of emitting some really awful stuff into our air that's affecting our health, and it's affecting climate change. We need to do something now. And like I say, I'm hoping this is the beginning really of a community-wide conversation, that we do this together, we do it with a feeling of being part of something important and part of something that's for the good of all of us. So with that, I am going to ask Lief to come up, and you'll hear more about his organization and this survey that was just conducted.
Thank you, Erika. Erika, thank you. Thank all of you, or big thanks to all of you for being here today. I really appreciate how active people are on this island and passionate they are about this issue. And I really appreciate the invite to be here today. And so Erika was talking about some national trends and even some local trends. I'm going to focus on a couple specific items that have to do with the island. And I actually think, personally, there's reason to be optimistic. And I think there's a lot of people dedicated to this. And hopefully, as I take you through this little ride, you will be drinking some of the Kool-Aid as well. I think most of you here are probably people that already believe in this and have a passion for this. So again, thank you for being here. I am Lief Horwitz. I'm the chair of the City of Bainbridge Island's Multi-Modal Transportation Advisory Committee. Been in that role for a couple of years, been on the committee for a number of years. And today I just want to talk about three things. I want to give you a quick overview of what we do as a committee. Don't want to get too down in the weeds on that. would like to spend most of the time today talking about the recent survey that was conducted, and I suspect many of you actually participated in that survey. And we got some great information. It was extremely successful in terms of participation, and I think extremely successful in terms of what it tells us and what we should consider as we move forward. And then also I'd like to talk about the Infrastructure Ballot Measure Task Force. I think some of you are aware of that, and the potential bond measure that could be on the fall ballot. That'll ultimately be a decision that City Council will make, but we will be reporting out on that shortly as well. So we are a committee of citizens just like you, 7 members appointed by the mayor, approved by council. We advise city government, city staff, and we serve as a resource for citizens, meet once a month, public meeting. Many of you have been to those meetings before. We encourage you to come. We always have public comment set aside for people to participate. And really we're guided by 2 key documents, our comprehensive plan and our island-wide transportation plan. Again, I'm not going to drill down too much on those, but I think it's important to kind of throw those out there to give you a sense of our foundation. So many of you are probably aware the comp plan was updated in 2016. Very important document. Very important document in terms of the transportation vision that it sets up. And I think it's important to note too that it has a technical component to it that really helps guide us as a committee, gives us some sidebars and ground rules to follow. One of the particularly, I think, important items of the comp plan is the transportation vision. And this really, I think, does a good job of capturing where we would like to be. I'm not going to read the whole thing there, but I have highlighted some of the more important elements of this. Again, I think most people here would agree that these are things that we're all on the same page about. And then within this plan, we have some very specific elements. I'm going to talk about what these actually look like in practice. I think it's important to know that they exist, but I'd like to drill down again and talk about what they look like in practice. So here's a couple key elements, and Erika touched on some of this, and I think this is really important to think about as we move forward. The notion of all ages and abilities. We're trying to either improve or create new linkages in our network that are actually accessible to all that are interested. And when we get into the conversation about the survey, there's certainly a lot of issues about safety and people's perception of safety. So it's really important to consider that. It's not just, I think a lot of times we talk about, say, ADA compliance, but it goes beyond that. There are perceptions, there are safe spaces, there are things that people just feel better about when they're enjoying one element of non-motorized transportation. Connection's key. One of the ways we've organized ourselves as a committee, we have a number of working groups. We have one called Walkable Winslow. We have one that focuses on safe routes to school, one that focuses on trails. So it's pretty varied. And in each of those groups, it's a really nice correlation to the work we're looking to do and the questions we asked on the survey. Again, Island-wide transportation plan, this was updated in 2017. This is one of the things that we've worked on as a committee. A lot of our energy on the committee, we have kind of standing items that we do, which would be reporting out to citizens or hearing citizen concerns, supporting staff. On our committee, we have 2 liaisons, one liaison from City Council, one liaison from the Parks Board, and then a city staff liaison. So those are critical linkages for us. And Erika alluded to the engineering department earlier. Chris Hammer in the engineering department is an amazing resource, and I'm not just saying that because Doug's here, but Chris has been a ton of help, and any product you see around here most likely is something that Chris worked on. All right, to the survey. So I just want to talk about a few things. Where did the survey come from? Why we did it? Who took the survey and what we heard? I apologize, I am going to kind of slow down here because I think it's really important for people to see things. I want people to understand how we did this, what the responses were. So not too long ago, a new group organized, Bainbridge Mobility Alliance. A number of people here are part of that. And really, this was a few concerned citizens saying, hey, we've got to get an organization out there that's really going to run front and center on some of these transportation issues. A group that is a big tent and draws people from existing groups or just concerned citizens. So the alliance came together, And really, there's a website up now, and I'll share that link at the end, but it's focused on how do we improve current conditions and how do we get a better sense of what attitudes are and people's concerns are when it comes to non-motorized transportation. So, objectives of the survey. Key was to gather baseline data on behaviors and attitudes. So what are people currently doing? Trying to understand people's perspectives and needs, identify priorities and preferences, and then gauge the willingness of people to support a measure if it went forward. Obviously a very important question. And I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised. Some of you are probably aware of some of the key results here. So this was 100% online and very widely promoted. I think this is a great example of where technology is beneficial. People out here have an amazing network, whether it's through Facebook or listservs or other means. I will say that this was a full court press, and that really made a huge difference. And it was really designed for one response from one device. Now, if you so desired and you chose to answer on different devices, you could do that, but I think most people probably only took the time or focused on one device here. So it wasn't randomized. For those of you who are students of surveys, we might have that conversation, but we really wanted to make this something that's open to all citizens, because part of this was not just getting the information, but we really saw this as a campaign, an outreach campaign, and we wanted people to better understand where we were going. And then a couple things just to consider here. Some of the limitations. So one is that we limited the info on what, we didn't have much information on what besides infrastructure improvements would motivate change. So that's important to know. We were focused on improving the infrastructure. And then we did not drill down to specific projects. So currently, the city has a rather expansive list of non-motorized projects, a wish list, that rolls up to about $40 million. If we are successful in a bond measure in the fall, we're looking approximately, if it's approved, about $15 million to support that with some matching funds. It would probably be about $20 million, so about half of that. But for the purposes of the survey, our desire was not to get too involved in specific projects. Obviously, you know, all of us are both happy when a project comes near us that benefits us and reluctant to have a project near us that may impact us. So the more creative conversation was here, what do we want to do on a large scale? And then let's begin to look at some specific projects. And that list that I referenced earlier, we've had 2 exercises as a committee over the last 6 years to prioritize projects. We have a number of criteria. We feel pretty confident that the list we came up with and the rankings we came up with are really defensible and will get a lot of support. And so, again, if we're successful in the end, and we begin to look at individual projects, our expectation is we'll deal with each individual project. Again, we think there's a good foundation for those, but inevitably, as we deal with individual projects, we're going to have to talk about individual concerns. This survey was looking at broader attitudes and concerns. So, almost 1,600 people, which was amazing. We were, I think, aiming at 800, so we almost doubled the respondents. 97% of those people were island residents. Interestingly enough, 62% of the respondents were women. And I want to bring this up again because there's some interesting things we found out about that in terms of gender. In this next bullet, half were commuters, and then half of those commuters travel to Seattle. So it's half of half. A third of the respondents were parents of school-aged children. And these 2 bullets are interesting too. Less than a quarter were frequent bike riders, but close to 3/4 define themselves as frequent walkers. So a lot of times, and we've, as a committee, we've begun to hone our message. For years, we used to talk about biking and walking. And really, we're switching that conversation to walking and biking because, quite honestly, more people walk than bike, and we need to be aware of that as a committee. I think it's glamorous to talk about biking, but it's critical to talk about walking as well. And so we are consciously switching that around. And then of the respondents, 4% had particular limitations. Again, important, especially in the Winslow core and some of the things we're looking at in terms of making sidewalks more accessible. All right, I don't know, hopefully you can read this here. This is the age distribution for adults. So the darker blue category is 18 to 24. The orange is 25 to 44. The gray is 45 to 59. The yellowish orange, 60 to 74. And then the lighter blue is over 75. If you look at those same colors on the other side, so we have the age distribution on the left, then we have the survey age distribution on the right, there's a pretty good correlation there. It's not exact, but it's pretty good. So again, whatever the color is here representing a certain entity, it's the same representation over there. So you can see some differences, but some pretty good correlation in general there. Now, here we have, I mentioned earlier about the gender distribution. On the island, almost 50-50, slight, there's 52% women, 48% men, but you can look at who answered the survey in terms of gender, and it skews towards female respondents. And this is, again, important as we talk about some of the concerns that some of the female respondents had in terms of the current infrastructure. Residential distribution, again, a pretty good correlation. This was sort of on the honor system. We divided the island into 4 quadrants almost, if you will. We have downtown Winslow, which is the blue, the center island, but not Winslow. So for instance, I live in Northtown Woods. You're kind of on the fringe of that. North Island, and then South Island. And again, looking at how people responded, pretty good. You know, I would say the biggest difference perhaps is the South Island in terms of the correlation, but really pretty consistent right there. All right, so now to the findings. We've talked about who responded. Now we're going to talk about what we found. So 71% of residents, or I'm sorry, respondents, rated the biking environment somewhat or very unsafe. So that's pretty significant, 71%, somewhat or very unsafe. 48% of the respondents rated the infrastructure for walking as bad or very bad. I will say that in Winslow, this number was better. People felt that it was a better infrastructure, but still overall, island-wide, you can see almost half of the people believe that it was not safe. Finding number 2, and again, these are just some of the more important takeaways. So here we have 71% of those who do not bike or would like to bike more identified inadequate bike infrastructure as a barrier. So they're actually concerned about the bike infrastructure. Next one I think is very important too. 77% of parents with school-aged kids said lack of safe infrastructure was a barrier to their kids walking or biking to school. So if we're trying to set this example for the younger residents of the island, which obviously we're thinking longer term, we're not really setting them up for success currently. I'm pretty active in the Sakai Bike to School Day, the Ordway Bike to School Day, and it's really exciting to see that one day where there's tons of kids and parents out there, but it's one day. And it'd be great if that was every day. You know, that would be really nice to see. So, finding 3, people want a range of infrastructure improvements. Please pay attention to this one because in many ways this is generating the direction we're moving in as we think about recommendations for projects. 88% of people talked about shoulder improvements. Shoulder improvements, some of you may be familiar with the Core 40 concept. I'll touch on that a little more, but you can kind of think of this as Core 40 projects. So in other words, improving our shoulders so that people can walk and bike on those shoulders. And then also you could see almost 3/4 safe routes to school was very high. Again, this is the barriers that are currently exist toward kids and parents and even staff getting to school. I'm willing, maybe when we have our Q&A, I can throw this back up here. I know this is one of those slides where you say, you probably can't see in the back of the room. My apologies. There's really no elegant way to blow this up and show this. This is just emphasizing the previous numbers that I put out there. So again, we can bring this up later if you'd like to see that. I think the key numbers here, or the key categories, are the green and purple, the very important and important. And you can see those on that bar graph. All right, so we talked about shoulder facilities. People want high quality shoulder facilities. So what does that mean? And this is, you probably recognize this on Madison, right in front of Ordway, Commodore. I don't know, probably many of you have walked or biked in that area. It's an unpleasant feeling when you have a vehicle like that coming by you. So more than half of the respondents indicated they wanted more than a standard 5-foot shoulder on major highways. Okay, so they wanted more than a 5-foot standard shoulder. 43% of interested but concerned cyclists said a buffered shoulder was their minimal acceptable option. So a buffered shoulder, sometimes there's a physical separation. It may be some kind of curb, it could be trees, or in some cases it's paint, but people enjoy having some kind of either visual or physical separation there. Motivating factors. So health is a big issue for walking and biking. People also put fun and enjoyment and a connection to nature. Ironically, I think as Erika pointed out earlier, sometimes we hop in a car to get to those places where we want to enjoy nature. So tree impacts. And this one we put up here because there was concern, especially with the first segment of the STO, there was a lot of conversation around tree removal. And obviously, if we go forward, we really need to think about this as an island. What are the trade-offs when we put a trail in terms of the ecology, and how can we strike that balance? So here it says, 2/3 of respondents expressed a moderate view regarding tree removal to construct walking and biking facilities as long as impacts are minimized. Very few people expressed a zero tolerance, so about 8%. Again, some food for thought here to think about, because undoubtedly as we move forward, there's going to be some vocal concerns about this legitimately, and I think it's really important as a community to think about that and strike that balance. This is a really important one for us, and kind of the million-dollar question, if you will. Okay, so we talked about all this stuff and you expressed your views. If there's a way to potentially improve this, would you be willing to essentially put money towards this? So we had worked out roughly $19 a household per month would be the impact of a $15 million bond. That was the math. 74% of the respondents said they would be likely or very likely to support this. And of the likely supporters, almost 60% indicated they would support a larger funding measure. So this was really good to hear. I don't think any of us enjoy what sometimes feels like just the next tax increase. Unfortunately, the way things are structured, we don't have as much access to funds as we would like. But if we are to pursue this, there does appear to be widespread support for it. So again, that was something that really we found very optimistic. Here you can see some of the demographics in terms of support. Really, it's a majority or a super majority across the board. It does peak with some groups here. But again, you can see that it's a widespread commitment. And some of these things I think are really interesting. I feel like we live in a pretty unique place in terms of how bicycles are used. It's kind of this odd juxtaposition where we have lots of adults that commute in the morning and jump on bikes, but very few children doing the same. And I think that's one of the things we really want to try and improve that balance. So here's some concerns of the non-supporters. 25% approximately were unlikely or very unlikely to support the measure. And really the two things that came out the most were a lack of support because they needed more information or justification. So I think Erika alluded to this earlier, some of the misconceptions around the bridge. This is an example of what do we need to do for a public campaign to improve that. And then a second totally legitimate one was just the concern about paying more taxes. Very understandable. So in addition to these set questions, people had an opportunity to give us whatever they wanted. And part of the group dug through all 779 responses. I was not one of those, so my hat's off to the rest of the team. But here's an example of some of the things that just came up. In no particular order, but this is just some of the stuff that we got. And from my understanding, we got very little nastiness in terms of responses. Pretty much everything was either a suggestion or a question, but there was very little nastiness in terms of people's responses. Again, I think that's something to clap about and be optimistic about people's attitudes. So I do want to touch on a couple things here. We talked about the gender imbalance. I want to touch on that and a few other things here. So about 540 people had school-aged kids. Here you can see the numbers in terms of their concerns. And the majority of them are concerned about the current infrastructure and want to see ways to improve that. Here we go in terms of the walking element that I mentioned earlier. 81% of downtown Winslow residents rated the pedestrian environment near their home as okay or very good. as compared to 52% of the rest of the island. Obviously, some parts of that is, this is a concentrated urban core, if you will, so that makes sense. But also, some of the things that make the island unique, we have this desire to have narrower roads and more tree canopy, and that doesn't always work well with sidewalks when you get outside of the Winslow core. So again, pedestrian environment. You can see on the North Island in particular, we only had, 38%, so approximately a third saying okay or very good. 4th of July parade. So a significantly higher percent of downtown Winslow residents reported frequently walking to get to destination. Again, you can see the numbers. Again, not surprisingly, some of it is just the limitations of the difference between the downtown core and elsewhere. Gender differences. So, men feel safer than women. Those are the responses here. That seems to be the perception. The percentage of men rating the biking environment as fairly or very safe was almost twice as high as that of women, almost twice as high. As a group, women show more risk aversion than men. Again, I'm referring to the survey here, and a greater need for high quality bike lanes and infrastructure. 46% of women were in the interested but concerned group compared to only 28% of men. Okay, so this is the group that would like to bike more, but is not comfortable with current infrastructure. They might be encouraged to bike if infrastructure is improved. 610 respondents, again, a very high number. This bullet down here, 95% of this group rated shoulder improvements as either important or very important, is pretty amazing. And then 83% of this group rated trails or paths to enable kids to walk or bike as important or very important. And this is something, I think having a conversation on this, whether it's partially today but into the future, this is a really important item. And we got to think about how to address this. There's a lot more information on the website. There is a nice press release on the website. And I'd like to suggest, I do want to quickly jump into, because I'm already running over here, the bond, and then we can, hopefully during the Q&A, we can go over questions you might have with the survey. So last year, a task force was put together to examine two elements here. And since the task force was put together, these two elements have been decoupled. One was non-motorized improvements. One was what was called the Town Square project. I can tell you more at the Q&A. Here's a key takeaway, though. In the charge from council to the task force, there was a ballpark about $15 million suggested to consider. In fact, as a committee, as a task force, those numbers jibe pretty well. So as we've looked through projects and looked through opportunities, really as we ramp up and roll up projects, we're thinking that that would be about the right amount to really make that big difference to improve the infrastructure. This is kind of the teaser here. Next week, we will be delivering our recommendations to the full task force. That is open to the public. That's next Wednesday. So stay tuned if you want to come. I encourage you to come and hear about that. That'll obviously be on the city website too as soon as we report out. So here's what the guiding principles. I think these make total sense to people. They should look quite similar to what I mentioned earlier in terms of what motivates us as a task force. But these are the things that we're really considering when we ranked projects. And then in closing, I really wanted to talk about these bins, because we found a really helpful way to look at these projects. I mentioned the Core 40. So about half of the funding, actually closer to 2/3 of the funding as proposed would go towards closing the gaps in the Core 40. Another significant portion would be going towards safe routes to schools. So when you use that category, it's an umbrella term. It could mean shoulder improvements. It could also mean trails, sidewalks. There's a lot of things that come in there. STO trail extension. One of the key things about the STO is that it's a matching arrangement. The city has to put together approximately 13.5%. And if successful, the rest of that comes from other funds. So regardless of where you stand on the STO, and I'd like to have that conversation too, it's actually a really good way to leverage money because of the way it's set up. Connecting pathways, this is the new development across from Rotary. I don't know if you've seen this. It's still going up as we speak, the fence and the houses, but part of the arrangement there was a connecting pathway. and then walkable Winslow. So again, these are the bins we often look at when we look at our projects and consider how to move forward. And that's it. And Erika, sorry for going longer than expected.
People like Lief and his group are giving and have given of their time. Many of them have full-time jobs to working this stuff through for us, and it's a real gift to the community. So thank you. Yeah. We're going to start questions and answers and a discussion, but real quickly, I'd like for you to keep something in your mind. It was mentioned Safe Routes to Schools, which is a wonderful organization. And it really gives us hope, because Safe Routes to Schools in 800 schools in 5 states increased walking and biking to school by 31%. With added infrastructure, 43%. We can do that. And I think that's really something to shoot for. You know, I'm with Climate Action Bainbridge, and we're working with these other organizations. It's a whole bunch of organizations have been turned on to this because we recognize what a huge issue this is for our city. Climate Action Bainbridge is embarking on a 3-year program to educate public, to get the conversation going, along with some of these other organizations. So anyway, there is a sign-up sheet outside. Would you like to be part of this movement to get people on their feet, to reduce traffic, to get us healthier? We'd love to have you. We'll be planning some events to sort of, publicize this thing, and we'd love to, and we need people to help us out with this. So, anyway, let's do questions. Yeah.
John Quitzland, my perspective on the Planning Commission. I'd like to add a couple of pieces of useful information. Lief's presentation covered so much ground and beautifully, but one thing that wasn't mentioned, the city's involved with a consultant in code consistency review. This is crucial to the implementation of Planning Commission, comprehensive plan measures, and that the city oversight, or the city sort of management of this process, is being taken care of by Morgan Smith. The thing that I think transportation, this relates to transportation, one of the things that's largely missing in the municipal code, as I understand it, is full attention to regulation of right-of-way usage. I think there are some obstacles that could be cleared out of the way for development of the policies that we're all interested in. And so some attention to the work plan and the ways of communicating on these issues would be useful, I think. Talking with Morgan Smith about where transportation comes into the process and how they will be approaching that, that's one thing. Another thing I'd mention is, you may be aware of it, but the Island Center sub-area planning process is underway now, and the Planning Commission member who's part of that process is Mike Killian. So he would be the person to talk with and get involved in the status of planning. Island Center is obviously, there's a lot of potential there, and I think they have a broad vision of what the right issues are and how to go about that process. It's been waiting for attention for many years now. They carried a planning process through almost to completion years ago, and it was stalled for reasons that I think arose from inertia within the council and struggle between the mayor's office and the council back then. So that's another place where, obviously that's a corridor that is important to transportation, and especially biking the Miller Road corridor there. So that's my contribution to the.
Thank you. Yeah, no, those are great suggestions. I mean, I think one of the areas we could improve as a committee is having more conversations across with other committees and commissions, undoubtedly. I think a lot of our energy recently has been focused on getting things prepared for this report out on the task force and the ballot measure. I expect we'll have a little time to catch our breath in the summer, because really once that is, if in fact improved by council, and this is really something I think all of you should think about, it's really, the onus is going to be upon groups that are not affiliated with the city to really push for this measure. That's it. There's a very clear line on what's appropriate there. So I bring that up because I think as a committee, that'll free us up to look at some of the other things that we've had to put on the back burner just because of the energy to devote to that. So it'd be great to talk. In fact, maybe we could start by, I could come to one of your meetings and vice versa. That's probably a really good way to start it. Thank you.
So I'd like to hear more about options for putting biking and walking on trails that have nothing to do with roadways. So for example, I've biked in China and Amsterdam and Germany, and I've biked in Anchorage, Alaska, and these are completely different experiences. Anchorage, Alaska has this bike path that has nothing to do with roadways. It just goes through the woods. It's gorgeous. You only have to worry about running into moose, which I don't think is a problem here. And but the other 3 places I've biked, which have these brilliant wide sidewalks with a special lane for bikes and a special lane for walkers, completely separate from cars, which I think are fantastic, they feel like cities. And I wonder if there's going to be a lot of pushback the way we saw at the very beginning of the Sound to Olympic Trail, right, with the clearing of the trees and the widening of the streets, if there's going to be a lot of pushback on that. And so I'm just curious to hear more about options for putting those bikeways completely separate, because we have so many little trails all over the island, and I just want to hear more about taking advantage of those.
Sure. Yeah, and that's a great point to bring up. We actually, we informally call it the Expeditionary Trail. So the vision is, as you probably know, the Sound to Olympics Trail would basically run in the 305 corridor, ultimately to the bridge. Parallel to that, to a certain extent, and if you picture the area behind Sakai and Woodward, and we're currently involved, we being the city, the school district, and parks, examining whether that trail can be improved. But if you picture that transect running up, crossing Cora, going through the middle of the island as a spine, there are actually designated areas that that we've called out that are either in the public right-of-way or would probably be something that some of the right-of-ways here, the paperwork, if you will, is a little outdated. So part of it is actually going in there and finding out where they exist. But our best estimate is that there is essentially a section that we could run from near Cora all the way up to, I want to call it Rotary Park, but I think that's not the right term. The park that Rotary built. Yes, by the bridge. So similar to what you mentioned, running, it would be a truly separated path. It would not be paved, so it would have some limitations, but it would be, the attempt would be to make it more accessible. So ultimately, it would be great to have those 2 resources that would allow people to get north to south. And I do want to mention, one of the things I think of as the STO, and I know the STO is controversial for a variety of reasons. Some people have the conception that it'll be great for tourists, but who's really going to use it here? I really feel like ultimately one way to look at it is that it's a linear park, and that it's not just a bike trail, but it's one of the few resources we'd have on island. It's kind of, you have all these creeks feeding this stream or river, and I think the STO has the potential to be that. It is a different experience. It would be paved, it would be closer to the highway. But I think we'll be pleasantly surprised to see, if we're successful in building out future segments, I think it's going to surprise us as to what it is as a resource, and that's why I think this notion of a linear park, to a certain extent, I'm hoping that that's what it becomes. On a Saturday morning, we jump on it and you just casually bump into friends, and that would be a really wonderful experience to have.
Thank you guys both so much. Just a couple comments, and maybe you want to respond to these a little bit. The first being that I noticed, Lief, you talked about kind of thinking about, as a committee, moving from maybe this aspiration we have about biking to thinking more about walkers. And I mean, this is not a zero-sum game, but I do want to just point out in my looking at your figures, you talked about how we have many more walkers who responded than bikers, but then you also talked about how there's a lot of impediments to biking safely. And as a person who wishes she would bike more, but feels unsafe, I absolutely agree with that category. And maybe we should think about the fact that we could have many more bikers responding to the survey if our conditions were better for biking and more people were actually out there doing it. So I'm hoping there's some aspiration to improving the conditions for bikers. And it sounds like there is. And then the other thing I will say is I work for the school district and I have a school-age daughter. And I spend a lot of time around the middle school campuses, and I really want to echo what you said, Erika, about the congestion, which is ridiculous around our schools. So we have dozens, one thing I'd love to see is more of a concerted survey just around kind of the patterns, because my sense is we have hundreds of parents picking up their children every day after school. And there are reasons to do that, but I also think there's an opportunity for a conversation around whether or not that's entirely necessary, or if we can look at ways to mitigate that, because it's a disaster for everyone. And one of the big impediments for my daughter biking from school is the cars all line up on the road next to the schools, and it's very unsafe for her to bike by them. So we have real safety issues as well as congestion issues around that. So I'm thrilled that these are being thought about and talked about.
We fully intend to extend this conversation and this kind of program with the schools, because it's going to take decision making on their part. It's going to take education on their part with parents, and good input. And I think your comments about bikes are right on. We got to take care of the needs of walkers. But I don't know about the rest of you. I'm not a biker, but every time I see one on the road, I want to applaud. Those are our heroes. I mean, that's fantastic. That's less cars on the road. Those people are doing the right thing, so let's definitely make it safe for them.
So yeah, the walk bike, really a lot of it is just acknowledging that as we improve facilities, odds are that more walkers will use them than cyclists. But undoubtedly, there are serious concerns and barriers to biking. And as a committee, we constantly talk about, we know there are a lot of people out there that either don't consider themselves a cyclist or are not responding because they haven't experienced it here on the island. I mean, they know how to ride a bike. That's not the point. The point is it's not a safe place to do it. In terms of the school, Sakai and Woodward, absolutely, live in Northtown Woods, see those cars there all the time. The other challenge, of course, is that the kids can't bike on the sidewalk, and this is a good thing because there's so many kids walking between the schools. So they're forced to be on the road, and it's a dangerous spot. So absolutely, we need to improve that, yeah.
So, Lief, when you went through the categories of how the money would be spent, and I don't know if that's fixed or if those are just suggestions at this point, but the lion's share was for Core 40, yep. And I think the second biggest category was around schools. Mm-hmm. It seems like maybe those should be reversed. I don't know what all is in the Core 40, but I would think addressing the schools issue would be the number one. So one question is, are those categories fixed? The other is, will the projects that the money's actually going to be spent on be more targeted, well-defined before we would vote on the bond? Or
yeah, so what I expect, again, if the recommendations are endorsed by the full task force, mm-hmm. and then they're forwarded to council and council endorses them, is that there will be examples within each. One of the balances we're trying to strike is putting forward a list of precisely $15 million worth of projects to the T, we think is counterproductive. And that's a conversation that I can talk more about, but there's a lot of factors that continually evolve on Bainbridge, whatever that might be. Opportunities arise, subdevelopments go in. There are things that have to allow for some fluidity, but getting to the Core 40, the main thing about the Core 40 is that it's a very good investment in creating a network that connects the whole island. Now, some of that is actually appropriate for safe routes to school. Some would not be, and that appropriateness really is a comfort level. Personally, I'm not going to put my 9 or 11-year-old on 305, but on another shoulder, I might reconsider that, especially if it's separated. So Miller Road improvements, for instance, that could potentially be an example, depending on people's comfort level, where it's a Core 40 project, but it also contributes to a safer route to school. So they're sometimes the same. We've had a lot of conversations about that balance, and I think that conversation continues. We've had 3 public workshops, a number of other meetings, and those are, again, it's hard to describe all the reasoning that got us to that point, but there's a lot of logic in that number, and that number has shifted a bit. I'd say the biggest shift was a lot more money was potentially going to be dedicated to Winslow, and for a couple of reasons. One, some of the perceptions that seemed to indicate there were better facilities in certain spots than we thought, and also the opportunity to get grants from other places. So, and I will add, Safe Routes to School has the same challenge where you can get money from other sources as well that you might not get for a Core 40 project.
And, keep in mind that this isn't the end of this. If we're looking at this as a long-term kind of program where we're constantly, upgrading these services, and as Lief said, some of these projects, they know pretty well are eligible for grant money. So the things that aren't, let's take the bond money. We had a question here, yeah.
Yeah, I want to plant a seed related to Core 40. I live in the south end of the island, 7 miles and several hills from Winslow, so I don't readily get on my bike, both because of the bad shoulders and the distance and the hills. I have wanted, since the beginning of Sustainable Bainbridge, to see a better bus system during the day. Core 40, and I'm thinking to an experience I had last summer where San Juan Island has buses that circuit the island all day. You can easily hop on here, get off in town. I would love it if we think of the spines that you've created in Core 40, walkable or bikeable places that link these, and a bus that circuits around. I'm over 70 now. I'm not going to be biking, walking forever. So I think we need to think about, I think we can complement things with a bus service that would be reliable, that would be constant, that would have regular stops, and most of us would be willing to walk half a mile on a safe shoulder to get to a bus.
Yeah, I've been talking to the bus people a lot, and we've got a baseline. We know now last year by month the use of the buses. What's sort of surprising is that we need to have more uses and creative uses as our bus right now to show a demand. The other day when I got on the bus in Linwood, I was the only one. There's something wrong with that. And so, yeah, I think, many of us are in total agreement. We need a bus that goes all over. But first, we need to get people to use the services we have. And, none of those buses pay their way. So it's going to be a matter of finding some funds to do that. But I think it's crucially important for all the reasons we've talked about today. We need buses. But the other thing to think about is, and I happen to mention my case, is that if I drive to Linwood, I can take care of all my needs going into town, at least until at night, with the bus service. So if some of these stops are much closer to you than town, use it that way for now. But ultimately, a bus going all around the island would make a lot of sense. I just want to say real quickly before I introduce Bobby, you people are the instrumental people in our community who come to forums like this because you absolutely care. And many of you are the people who are leading an alternate way to transport yourself. And, like I said before, let's do some proselytizing. Don't hide your good works under your hat. Tell people, mention it. Hey, I biked into here today. I walked. I took the bus. Whatever it is, that spreads. Let's normalize saner transportation for all of us. And I'd like now to introduce Bobby with CCL, and they ran a contest, and she can tell you all about it.
Yes. We're going to bring this morning back around full circle because Erika highlighted, and the other speakers have highlighted, the role and the importance of youth in these questions. Citizens Climate Lobby's Bainbridge chapter sponsored an essay contest on climate for young people. And I'm going to share the powerful voice of a 16-year-old Kingston High School sophomore by the name of Nihilus Swanson, who won the contest. So bear with me, hear his words and his feelings, and then I think we're supposed to stick around for a little while and continue the Q&A with our speakers. So here's Nihilus. Destruction. The word brings visions of hurricanes, earthquakes, and the ever so dangerous atom bomb. However, destruction may be brought on through a much more subtle route, human desire. The greenhouse gas-filled atmosphere is the result of combinations of natural occurrences, but mainly the ever-growing amount of industry across the globe. If not dealt with soon, the increase on greenhouse gases will lead to the loss of many human and animal lives, as well as the annihilation of life as we know it. Before anything can be done, what climate change is and why it is happening both need to be made clear. So, to begin, climate change is the altering of atmospheric and weather conditions across the globe, not just heating, as it is often believed, although that is the most prominent and consistent change. According to findings published in a NASA article from 2010, Earth's atmosphere has warmed approximately 0.7 degrees Celsius in the past century alone. That is about 10 times as fast as it rose over a 5,000-year period, which was about 4 to 7 degrees Celsius. And at the current rate, the Earth's atmosphere will increase about 35 degrees Celsius over the next 5,000 years. That's a lot. This temperature increase is due to an increase in the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. When the light from the sun that is not absorbed reflects off the Earth's surface, it is done so as infrared waves. These waves are too large to move in between the carbon dioxide, methane, and other molecules that make up the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. As a result, they are stuck on Earth and contribute to the planet's overall temperature increase. So how did all this start? Greenhouse gases have been in the Earth's atmosphere ever since the Earth has had an atmosphere, about 4.5 billion years. All sorts of natural occurrences contribute to the addition of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere: volcanic eruptions, decomposition, animal respiration. However, what changed all that was the Industrial Revolution. Up until then, plant life in the ocean had been able to absorb most, if not all, of the carbon being produced and recycle it, creating carbon dioxide cycle. However, this historic event resulted in hundreds of factories and the idea of burning coal as a source of energy. And what does combustion often create as a byproduct? Carbon dioxide. The demand for factory products grew and grew and grew, and the planet stopped being able to manage the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. People slowly grew to become more and more reliant on what the Industrial Revolution led to, such as cars, public electricity, and mass production, so life without it nowadays seems impossible. As a result of all this heating, what's going to happen? For starters, droughts will be experienced at a much higher rate, and according to NASA projections, sea levels will rise around 0.2 to 2 meters by 2100 if greenhouse gas emissions continue at their current rate. That may not seem like a lot, but that is 2/3 of a foot up over 6.5 feet. Basically, imagine the ocean as more than a whole person taller, and then think about how much land that would cover. And that's only with the current rate of increase. So if industrialization and greenhouse emissions were to increase at an even greater exponential rate, then the results would be even more catastrophic. Finally comes the biggest question of all: what do we do? The answers range from ridiculous, such as ignoring all of the science, as many politicians are doing, to a bit outlandish for the immediate future, such as moving everyone to Mars, as many people are currently looking into for the somewhat farther future. And in between are a range of scientifically fascinating ideas, such as carbon vacuuming and planting plastic-eating bacteria in clouds. But this is an issue that needs to be dealt with in the here and now. So what do we do? Well, to start off, we need to lower carbon dioxide emissions in the atmosphere in order to allow nature to do what it does best and deal with our mistakes, in other words, recycling all of the carbon dioxide that we've added to the atmosphere. How do we do that? A large portion of that comes from transportation. About 1.54 billion tons in 2016, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. So a combination of increased use of public transportation as opposed to personal vehicles and the gradual switch of all vehicles to electric, this would cut carbon emissions immensely. However, this would require governmental action and cooperation from both sides of the aisle, as well as acceptance of what science has proven to be happening. Laws need to be set in place to regulate oil drilling as well as mass production of items. I love that line. Additionally, comes the need to fund public works projects to increase the efficiency of public transportation. All of this could bankrupt large corporations such as ExxonMobil, but it would be worth the monetary loss as it would help greatly in saving the planet itself. Unfortunately, people tend to be selfish and think only of themselves. So for them, I say, you could make money off of being the providers of electrical stations in place of all those gas stations. There is still profit even without gasoline. Throughout Earth's history, there have been 5 major extinctions, and humanity is past due for ours. The Mayan calendar predicted the end would come in 2012. Some people believe the rapture will claim us all. But isn't just as likely that our mass extinction will come at our own hands? Humanity has pushed the potential of what we can do with our planet, has passed its limits time and time again. We harnessed fire, we utilized silicon, we even created our own elements. But shouldn't we take a step back and look at what all of our success is doing to the planet itself? Every day we drive to work, we add to landfills, we produce thousands of items to make our lives easier. And through it all, we kill ourselves slowly. Humans have proven that their ability to achieve their dreams and to reach new heights is unrivaled in Earth's history. So why should we be so foolish as to let our hubris be our own undoing? We can save ourselves. All we have to do is learn to look at the bigger picture and say, I can live with a little less to give us all a lot longer.